All right, the weekly chit-chat. I got some topics, so I'll go one by one. Hopefully I'll be able to talk for an hour. I don't know. I'm already pretty tired. Anyway, the first thing on here, let's see, it's a question. Why does there appear to be a mindset of a superior understanding among intellectuals who do not operate in the realm of logic, but in a realm where logic seems to be quaint or naive? Why is there somehow a superior air about people who can operate in an environment of chaos or an environment of reliance not on logic but on emotion and rhetoric, just words put together in a attractive way? As children, when we go through school, we're impressed by teachers who can communicate effectively, and we get imprinted with the idea that as long as you can convey your ideas well, you should be listened to. And then we get exposed to how the court system works, for example, and we see so-called good lawyers being able to convince the jury or the judge of just about anything with convincing rhetoric. If you go into the actual logic of the arguments, many times it's not there. The arguments are based on how an audience, like a jury, will respond, and not, respond emotionally and not respond intellectually or think about it. Okay, we're programmed to be in awe of people who can make things happen through words. And that brings about an air. They have to have an air of credibility and an air of authority in order to pull this off. And it's considered very wise in society to be able to do this, to pull off the convincing rhetoric that can basically sell you, sand in the Sahara Desert, that kind of attitude, that can actually convince you to do almost anything. It seems to be the number one good thing to be, is someone that can do that. As you get older, you become less and less impressed with that ability, and you can see the BS. But it takes time, because you have to be victimized by that BS several times to pick it up, and you realize that it's not the way to be. It's not intellectually superior. How do you convince children of this? It's almost impossible, because when you are a parent and you have children, the environment that the children are in a family environment, is authoritarian, and they need to listen to the parents because they have experience and authority in the sense of they know what the outcomes are of certain things, so you need to listen so you won't fall into the same problems. Okay, that kind of authority, the authority of knowledge. So children get both the authority indoctrination from their parents and then also from the schools. And as you start to communicate with people, you start to gain respect for those who can convince anyone of anything. Just through words. Say the magic words, and it does the magic thing, and people say, oh yeah, that's convincing. And I've been trying to figure out how to immunize yourself from that at an early age. If I were to tell myself, my young self, something in that arena, I would say, keep it to yourself, but recognize the BS. Most of what you hear, if it's ideas and the enthusiasm for ideas and the acceptance of an idea up front, if that's the primary thing that people are trying to convince you of, that's going to be insufficient, because what's really at stake is the result. If I were to tell my young self something, keep it to yourself that you recognize the BS, but recognize that the results are what we need to focus on, not how good the idea sounds or how good an argument sounds in the beginning, or the premise. The premise of the argument often will sound really good, and then everything else seems to be logical that follows it, but the premise is not any good. We need to look at the result. So if you know that this premise yields bad results, you are not to listen to the good results that supposedly will happen. All right? The reason why I say keep it to yourself is because this requires a lot of thought. You can have a knee-jerk reaction and get into the habit of questioning authority for no good reason. You have to have good reasons, because authority is necessary, especially in a family setting. If we teach children to be rebellious, then it's bad in the family setting. It may be all right once they become adults in the setting where the state is oppressive, but in the family setting, it doesn't work. There is a difference there between a family setting and society. And that division comes about when you become an adult. Before you're an adult, it's necessary for you to be in an authoritarian environment, but after that, it's the opposite. You are not to be in an authoritarian environment. Adulthood means freedom. All right? And freedom has responsibilities. Freedom, in order to operate within the law, you need to have a responsible personality. You need to actually know what the laws are. You need to know how to think properly so that you know if a law being created is just or unjust. But freedom is the objective of adults. Once you turn 18 or 21, whatever the adult age is in that particular society or whatever, that means freedom. Now, in authoritarian states, the family setting never changes. It never, how should I say? It does change. It changes hands, but it doesn't change in structure. So in an authoritarian setting where the state is controlling everything, the state now becomes your family and you remain a child. Okay. Children have rights, but their rights are limited because they have to be taken care of. And there's the parents have responsibilities to take care of the children. So there has to be a very structured environment, or there can be no guidance, strict guidance in that environment, and there can be no strict strict rules for who is in control, let's say, of the children's education, who is in control of the children's healthcare, who's in control of the children's exposure to different things in the world. You know, the parents are in control in a family setting, and when the children become adults, the adults are now in control. They are in control of themselves. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now, the state does have responsibilities. As long as we construct a state that is an employee of society, we can manage the state as adults. Now, I've been studying a lot of books that go over how the structure of the state operates in different environments, and I want to be well versed in how socialism works so I can effectively communicate the things that I don't like about socialism. And one thing I don't like is the structure of socialism doesn't allow adults to become adults. It forces adults to remain children with limited rights, needs taken care of by other people, and those needs are considered to be rights instead of entitlements. When you're a child, you do have a right to be safe and taken care of, but that right shifts to yourself when you're an adult. You have the right to take care of yourself and to provide for yourself. But as children, they need someone else to provide for them. But in a state that's authoritarian, the state wants to provide for the adults as well, and so they'll find some way or some segment of the population to take the place of parents, usually in the form of their money, and distribute that money in a way that the majority can live as children. With a lot of entitlements. Now, I focus a lot on rights because it's a mystery to me why they aren't discussed. And when they are discussed, it's usually not rights that they're discussing, but entitlements or something that other people need to pay for, or something that other people do that needs to be compensated. You know, you don't have a right to something that requires money or labor on someone else's part. A right is something we exercise as individuals. An entitlement is something you pay for, or something that needs to be paid for. That's an entitlement. It's not a right. And authoritarian states, they make this issue confusing. And when I was little, I used to hear a lot about rights. When I grew up in the 70s, I heard a lot about rights. But as time went on, it just the rhetoric surrounding consent, informed consent, rights, and personal responsibility, that rhetoric just went downhill until there's nothing there anymore. It's not discussed anymore. So yeah, I would tell my young self to be aware of the BS surrounding rhetoric that sounds good. I didn't learn about logic until I went into college, and I took my first English course, and we learned logic so that we can write better. And then I said, why didn't we learn this starting in like 6th grade in school, so that we can be conditioned to understand logic step by step, how ideas follow each other, and how to find the truth, how to search for truth. One of the ways to search for truth is to know what is wrong. you become less wrong over time, and that gets you closer to the truth. That's one of the best ways to find truth. The other is just through careful observation and testing. Careful observation and testing, and be very sure of your observations, and very sure through experience that your observations are correct. All right? And learn what it takes to be deceptive. If you learn deception techniques, then you can see, or you can try to understand, or you can recognize when a deception is being put in front of you. If you understand how deceptions work from an early age, it's a little bit different than being skeptical. It's like you will be tuned into how this can be abused, or how this can be deceiving. Is it deceiving? It takes practice to learn how something can be deceiving. And that goes for deceptive arguments with logic, or deceptive appearances with personality traits or errors or things like that people do to try to convince you that they have credibility. A lot of people have credibility, but a lot of people don't. And the ones that don't, and the ones that become skilled at covering their incompetence or whatever, those are the ones we have to watch out for, right? Unfortunately, the ones that are good at covering for their incompetence are the ones that eventually rise in positions of power, because they have that skill of deception. And why do they want positions of power when they know they're incompetent? Well, the main reason is, once they have power, and once it can't be taken away from them, then it doesn't matter if they're incompetent. In fact, once they're in positions of power and they're not doing a good job, they can shift the blame to something else, like lack of money. So give me more money and I will do better, because we're lacking funds, or we're lacking personnel, or we're lacking something. I need more. That's one of the big excuses. That first flaw of allowing the incompetent to gain power, or to the insane to gain power, leads to all the other things that cause downfalls. So we need to recognize insanity and incompetence. Insanity is a big one, and I wasn't taught this kind of thing when I was young either. From a young age, we need to be taught about narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathic personalities, all these cluster B personality disorders, the ones that can be diagnosed, and the ones that are in the gray area. There's a small segment of the population that can be definitely diagnosed with these disorders, but there's a much bigger population that's kind of in a gray area that operate with the same traits and yet can't clearly be diagnosed. That's the dangerous segment of society. Not the ones we can recognize right off the bat that they're insane. No, it's the ones that operate in that gray area where they can cover their insanity, either by skill, they know how to cover their insanity, or controlling those things that put them in that category of pathological. They may be pathological, but they may be able to control certain things to keep them out of those diagnoses. There's a large segment of those kind of people in the gray area compared to the ones that can be immediately recognized. Now, authoritarians will point to the ones that can be immediately recognized. Those are the only insane ones. No. Why do authoritarians do that? It's because people who are not all with it are extremely politically active. That's the key. The irrational are highly engaged in politics. Why? The same reason. It allows them to operate successfully even though they're incompetent or have very little ability to do much of anything except gain power. Once you're in a position of power, you try to solidify that power. Once it's solidified, it doesn't matter what you do. That's the key. You don't have to keep being good at what you're doing in order to maintain your position of responsibility. If you are in a position of power and solidify that by making yourself immune in some way, either paying people off or some other way, then it doesn't matter if you're competent or not. That's the situation that we find ourselves in when government gets out of hand. All right. All right. I wrote the question down. What does it mean to be persuaded to change your mind? I think I was listening to an audiobook when that was being discussed. When you change your mind, what is that? What does that mean when you change your mind and start thinking in some other way? And why is it an important skill to be able to do that and cause people to change their mind? And I think the audiobook was making the point that this phenomenon of being able to persuade someone to change their mind is not well understood, or it's an amazing thing. Something in there that isn't, we don't quite understand how that works. Okay, but it can be a skill with some people. They figured it out. They have hacks that can change people's minds. It's a very important skill. Most of the time it's used for cheating or something that's not good. Usually you don't have to change someone's mind if something makes sense. Yeah, they go along with it. I mean, it just makes sense. But to change someone's mind to do something that doesn't make sense, that requires some skill. And that's where skill in that arena can be effective for political reasons. But I'll do more research on that one, on this mechanism of how to change people's minds. I was listening to another podcast or a video, and this idea came up. The idea that why do you want something to be a certain way? Let me think of an example. Let's say that it's my opinion that there is no such thing as leprechauns. Now, some people might ask, well, why do you want there to be a world in which there are no leprechauns? No, what I'm saying is that there isn't any. And then they'll ask again, well, wouldn't it be a better world if there were leprechauns? I mean, why do you want a world without leprechauns? You see where I'm getting with this, right? The same with questions about God. If I say there is no God, they'll ask, why do you want there to be a world without God? Why do you want that? No, I'm just stating that that's what it looks like. And then they'll come back with, how can you possibly want a world like that? Can you live in a world like that? Me, yes. And I can live in a world without leprechauns too, or Santa Claus for that matter, or anything like that. But yeah, some people have the attitude that some people just want the world to be a certain way, and it's a matter of wants. And if you want something that doesn't seem right, then you're not right. Your wants are not right. And they reduce it to a want or an emotional decision. A want is kind of an emotional decision because want sounds like desire. The word want is troublesome to begin with, but when you phrase it that way, why do you want something to be a certain way? You're pushing the argument toward the emotional side. Want doesn't have to be emotional, but that's what it seems like because a want is like a desire. It's almost the same word. Want and desire is almost the same word. No, but when you speak a truth, it's not because you want that. You just recognize it. I recognize it. It's not that I want it. I just recognize that there's no leprechauns, as an example. First of all, the leprechaun is not well defined. We don't really know. I mean, it changes over time. The definition, they used to be one thing and now there's something else, and you see them on cereal. You see one on a cereal box now, a breakfast cereal box. So, I mean, the definition changes over time. So how can that be the same thing? That's part of recognizing that it's not a real thing if it changes over time. It's just a construction. It's a construct. If you recognize something as a construct, you say that's not real. You're just recognizing it. It's not that I want it to be false. It just is being recognized as false. All right. So that got me thinking in that arena. But I can't figure out if people actually think that way. Like, why do you want it to be such and such? Are people actually thinking that, or is that just a rhetorical question? Or is that just a question to make the person who is wanting something bad look bad in their eyes? Like if I say there is no such thing as love, right? People would say, why do you want a world like that? It makes me look bad if I were to say there's no such thing as love. If it seems like that's what I want. I want a world without love. But no, it's not necessarily that way. Now, do I believe there's such a thing? Yeah. As love, yeah, I do believe there's such a thing. That's just an example. All right. Do people who are critical, people who say truths, do those people actually think that way, or are they just spouting something rhetorical to make you look bad? That's what I can't figure out exactly. I think it's the latter. They're just spouting something that makes you look bad, so that it goes back to the original idea that I started with in the first part of this talk, that people who can convince other people of something gravitate toward what people like and talk about what people like. All right. And they'll make other people sound bad, especially those who are trying to tell the truth. Now, I don't know if the people who are opposed to truth are actually opposed to it, or they're just rhetorically opposed to it because they think it's naive, obsolete, not really part of the real world as far as the real world operates. We can operate in a world that's fiction just fine, they might think. Or it reminds me of an expression, perception is reality. That statement, perception is reality, is treated like wisdom. No, it's not wisdom at all. Perception is part of reality. Your perception is part of reality, but it is not reality. It can't be. It has to be verified. perception just by itself can't be counted as reality. It has to be verified in some way. Okay, and we can understand this easily just by understanding how logic works and how things make sense, right? Anyway, let's get into a different topic. Yeah, when I was looking at school curriculums when my kids were going to school, the schools will not teach logic, for one, and number two, they'll just throw anything out there, and you have to learn it, memorize it, accept it, and then spit it back out, regurgitate it. That seems to be the goal of schools. They just throw something out. It can be anything, but they're looking to see if you accept it, just deal with it, and then spit it back out. Just repeat it back. They'll tell you something, you learn it, memorize it, and then repeat it back. It just on and on and on. And it doesn't have to be true. Their defense is we're just teaching kids how to organize their thoughts, memorize and learn things, and then repeat it back so that we know that they've learned it. The teachers or the education system will have that excuse that it's something that it's just part of the exercise of learning how to learn, that kind of thing. What's insidious about it, or what's dangerous, is that when the children become adults, the state can say anything it wants, and then you're programmed to accept it, learn it, and then repeat it back. That's the danger. But, of course, the state knows this. And once the state gets involved with education, that's instantly what happens. Whatever the teachers say, accept it, deal with it. Doesn't have to be the truth. It's just part of the way people interact with learning materials and get you into that habit. And then once you're out of school, you're in the habit. You don't even need to have the excuse that it's just learning materials and the method of learning. You just automatically have the habit of accepting, no matter what it is, learning it and repeating it back. When I was in school, it was the same way, but it was a little bit different. It was a little bit different, but not much. I'm trying to think of a pretty good example. Yeah, I wish I could have spent more time in my kids' classrooms. When I was going to school, the teachers were pretty serious about truth. I did spend some time in some of my children's schools, and the teachers were not as concerned about truth. They were concerned more about process. Everything was about process. Yeah. That's the dangerous thing these days. Once that happens, that's a bad thing. And we need to separate. We need to separate the state from education, separate the state from the economy, separate the state from religion, separate the state from everything. The state is only there to protect human rights. Like I said before, anything other than that is an abuse of power. The state is an employee of the people. It is employed to protect, to enshrine in law, human rights, individual human rights. There is no group human rights. The human rights in a group are just the rights of all the individuals. I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about the right to exercise your responsibilities of your job or of your occupation or of your mission in life, whatever. You have the right to pursue the responsibilities, the activities related to your responsibilities. And it gets into the arena of lawfare. If you have a responsibility to do something and you have procedures in place or even invented to help you carry out those responsibilities, you have a right to do those, and laws cannot be enacted justly to interfere with those activities. I'm seeing these days that activities that were part of your responsibilities are now being retroactively made illegal for certain people, just so the government can have a case against them and put them in jail. I suppose this goes on a lot, but it gets done under our noses if no one's concerned about human rights. Yeah. If we don't know human rights, if we don't know the right that we have the right to carry out our responsibilities in ways that have worked before within the law, without having to worry about those ways being made illegal because somebody doesn't like us or whatever. Someone in the government doesn't like us. The state cannot become the oppressor. So the society must structure the state in such a way that the state is an employee of society. And that relationship between boss and employee must be there. We must be able to fire the government. If we cannot, or if the government operates in secret, or both, this is not a boss-employee situation that it should be. Now, elections are how we're supposed to fire the government. It's a peaceful way of the transition of power. Elections are the peaceful way to cause a transition of power or to cause a change in government. Once elections are controlled, we lose that power to change government. Taking away our voting ability by controlling the outcome of elections forces the only other alternative, which is violence. Elections, we must be very diligent on how they are conducted, how they're monitored, and how they're controlled. We don't want to get into a situation where the only way to change government is violence. We don't want to get into that situation. But if government becomes too powerful, they will force that situation. And then, of course, they'll be in a position of the advantage because they have all the weapons. Now, in our situation here in this country, our Constitution was written well enough that balance of power is still there. There is still there's still a powerful population, but that power in the society it just keeps getting weakened and weakened by the state. We have to be very careful. I got to be very careful about what I say too in that regard. Elections are our way to fire the employee, the state, or change management or whatever. Elections are extremely important. Anyone who doesn't vote is not exercising their rights as an adult. They're just remaining children. It's one of the ways that you signal to others that you're still a child if you're not voting. Okay. All right, I already went over some of these other ones. 40 minutes. I might cut it off here. I really don't have anything prepared per se. I wanted to go into deeper topics, but even short notes like this take a lot of time to write down and think about. Yeah, so I'm not going to take too much time to write out things when I'm doing these chats. I'll take more time on the shorts. How's that? As far as logic goes, teaching logic, what I've decided on that is it's better for me to teach the fallacies. The easiest thing for me to do is just to show how certain reasonings are called fallacies and why they're untrue. They sound right in many cases, but they're not rational. A fallacy is a way of saying something that's wrong. It sounds right though. Yeah. Like one of the fallacies is if you use a concept that you have denied exists, it's a fallacy. It's like saying, listen very carefully. There is no one who is in a position of authority. Well, whom am I supposed to listen to you now? Because you sounded like you were in a position of authority, but then you say there isn't any. So you're using an idea that you say doesn't exist. If I were to say, listen to me very carefully, there's no such thing as anyone who is in a position of authority. See how that works? You can't use something that you've just denied exists. Okay? That's a fallacy. When you use something that you deny exists. Now, why do I mention this one? I mention this one because this particular fallacy is extremely common within philosophy in different contexts. You know, you can say something like, humanity is just, humans are completely insane animals. And I arrived at this in a logical way. Well, you just said that humans are completely insane animals. How did you arrive at this in a logical way? But some philosophers are like that. They will say stuff like humans are a completely irrational animal. And I arrived at this rationally. I arrived at that conclusion rationally. Well, how can you arrive at that conclusion rationally when you just said that humans are irrational? You know what I'm saying? That's one of the main fallacies we got to watch out for. And when you start to understand that, you will notice that there is just so much of that. People use what they deny exists. They'll use it in their arguments. They'll use it in their statements about life or their observations. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm trying to think of another really good fallacy. I already mentioned the fallacy of the appeal to hypocrisy. Yeah, just because someone's a hypocrite doesn't mean that they're always telling a lie or whatever. And the appeal to hypocrisy has many different little subtle forms. Like, let's say I just ran a stop sign. I'm driving and I just ran a stop sign and I go, oops. And then I tell the passenger, make sure you don't run stop signs. It's dangerous. And then the passenger goes, I don't need to listen to you because you just ran a stop sign. That's one of the nuances of this appeal to hypocrisy fallacy. The passenger is thinking, well, I'm not going to listen to this hypocrite, but it's good advice. Don't run stop signs is good advice. Just because a hypocrite said it doesn't mean it's not good advice. We have to be careful. The fallacy of the appeal to hypocrisy is that the hypocrite is to be ignored. That's the fallacy. You don't ignore statements that are true, even if they come from hypocrites. You don't ignore those statements. Just because he's a hypocrite doesn't mean it's not true. All right? Now, when we look at the past of someone who is constantly hypocritical, and there's a pattern of hypocrisy, there's a pattern of lying, and there's a pattern of pretentiousness, and there's a pattern there, okay, fine. It's rational to look at the pattern and saying, okay, well, your pattern leads me to believe that maybe I should listen to someone else. Yeah, I don't put much weight. I do understand that some things that you say are true, but it's time that I move to a different source because your pattern is not good. You're inconsistent. I mean, that's rational. But when you meet someone online for the first time and they say something that's true, but it looks like they're a hypocrite, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is not useful or valid. All right? And I mention this one too because it's used a lot in today's society. They'll go, look, you did this, so I don't have to listen to you. Or, you are enabling this sort of behavior, so I don't need to listen to you. Yeah, you tell me not to do this, but you're enabling it, so I'm not going to stop doing it. Look what you're doing. That sort of thing. It happens a lot, and it's an appeal to hypocrisy. It's like saying, you're a hypocrite, I don't listen. In fact, I'm going to continue doing it. Even though it is true, I don't care because you are the hypocrite. That makes the statement invalid, even though it's true. That's the fallacy. That's why it doesn't make any sense. But people actually operate that way, and I can't figure out if it's because they actually believe they should operate that way, or they're operating that way out of vengeance. I'll get you. Because you're not worthy of speaking the truth, so I'll get you back by disobeying you. You're not worthy of telling the truth. You are telling the truth, but you're not worthy of saying it, so I will not listen to it. In fact, you're causing me to not listen to the truth, and it's on you. Don't be that way. And I don't know if it's that way because they are actually thinking that way, or if it's because they just want to be vindictive. I can't figure that one out. Although I think it's the latter. I think they know what's going on. They just want to be vindictive, and they just want to call someone unworthy. They don't want to listen to that person because they want to disrespect that person, and they'll find some way to disrespect that person. Sometimes they don't like the truth, so they'll find a way to disrespect the speaker that's speaking the truth, so they don't have to obey the truth, or they don't have to acknowledge it, or make it important, or make it a value in their life. Because these unworthy, despicable people are spouting these things. There's no way, even though if they're true, there's no way I'm going to adopt it because it's tainted with their unworthiness, tainted with their bad ways and that kind of thing. It's used a lot in today's society. It's this appeal to hypocrisy, to dismiss truths and to dismiss, advice. Now, like I said, patterns, recognizing patterns is a valid way of deciding whether or not we're going to listen to someone, especially the patterns of pathological lying or the patterns of using fallacies. If you see someone who has a pattern of using fallacies, which there are many, I just mentioned two, that's it. There's dozens. If there's a pattern of using fallacies, number one, it indicates a mental illness or some sort of anger or aggression or some sort of hostility. So we're going to need to keep in mind that it's not a good thing. But once in a while, if something comes up in an argument where it's just a mistake in thinking temporarily, okay, it's not a pattern. But yeah, it's useful to understand patterns. Is all I'm saying in order to be rational, and that's the exception to not listening to someone because they're a hypocrite. If they have a pattern of being that way, then all right. Well, who knows what else they may be lying about? They may not be lying about or being a hypocrite about this certain thing, but if they have a pattern of this weirdness, they may be deceptive in some other way. So it's not a good source to listen to that. The best source is your own source and your own observations and research, and being very sure of what you're observing and knowing how to recognize fraud and deceit and deception. Your own mind is the best tool for recognizing what is real and what is true. Your own mind. We have to take care of our own mind and train our own mind. It's the best defense against fraud, deception, and this way of thinking that somehow people are superior if they can operate in the realm of emotion and illogic and irrationality to make anything happen. Anything's possible in that arena, basically. They can change reality, they can discard reality, they can temporarily suspend reality. They can claim something is a miracle. As an example, it may not be, but there's no way to know. So they'll use that no way to know thing and proclaim that this is what it is. I will announce what reality is. They think that's more superior than finding out what reality really is. They think it's superior to be able to proclaim with authority what reality is. Somehow in the human mind, and it's probably that one section of the population, somehow in the human mind that's considered superior thinking. And that segment of the population, I think, is about 40%. All right, and the 10% is pathologically diagnosable. The 40% is the gray area, but that's 50%. That's half of the population. All you need is a little bit of convincing of normal people to tip the scale in favor of all those insane people. Now, yeah, 40% is a convenient number, but just from experience, 4 out of 10 people or half the people are not playing with a full deck, as an example. I think it's more actually than 40%, but I'm just saying, all you need in a population is 40% of the people in that gray area of insanity, and that 10% that are definitely insane, and a little bit of the regular not insane people to tip the scales in favor of the majority to create a big mess. And there are people who are skilled at doing just that. And why do you want to create a big mess? It creates a crisis environment where authority must intercede, and the population will be receptive to power grabs and responsibility grabs, asset grabs, all these seizures of things that are important. If there's a crisis, seizures are accepted. That's the key. There are people who are very good at gathering enough of the population together under the idea that they can change reality, and then if there's a crisis, those people, the majority, will give them the ability to seize the means of resolving these crises. And one of those things that they seize, they call it the means of production. What that really means is they seize whatever is making a lot of money. My hands are a means of production. But when socialists say they want to seize the means of production, they don't mean people's hands. They mean anything that makes a lot of money. They want to seize that factory. They want to seize that mine. They want to seize that financial institution like a bank. They want to seize whatever is making a lot of profit. If I'm just working by myself as a craftsman, I'm not making a lot of profit. They don't want to seize my means of production. Although, if you take them at their word, my hands are a means of production. What they're really going after in that case, they're not going after the actual means of production, like people's hands and brains. They're going after sources of wealth. When they say seize the means of production, what they really mean is seize the profits, the big profits. And we see this with governments all the time. They will nationalize huge profit-making enterprises. The bigger, the better. And those will be the first ones to be seized, like oil production, oil mining, petroleum mining, gold mining, copper mining, lithium mining. These kinds of things will be looked at as highly profitable and subject to seizure because they are highly profitable. Providing utilities like electricity and water. Those are state-owned in many cases. They produce huge profit margins. That's what they're talking about. That's what socialists are talking about when they're doing this, the statement, when they're saying the statement, let's seize the means of production. They're covering what they really want to seize is the extreme profit margins. That's what they want to seize. Now, when I interpret it as they want to seize everything. They want to seize your hands, your brain, your eyes, your mouth, everything that's involved in the means of production, because that is what is truly the means of production. They would seize it if they could. But it's just too outrageous. They can't get half the population to back them up on that. But they can get half the population to back them up on seizing large profits. They can do that. And as long as they cover it up with this phrase, seizing the means of production. Yeah. It's the seizing of the means of production doesn't sound that good. I mean, it doesn't sound that bad, right? Until you think about it. When you think about people, you're actually seizing them and controlling people. Seizing the profits is an obvious violation of the right to property. So that's bad. They often say it though. And the less they talk about human rights, the more they say we're going to seize the profits. It's unfair that owners make huge profits and don't pay their employees anything. They will say stuff like that as long as we're not talking about human rights. One of the human rights is the right to own property that you have planned on getting and then actually get lawfully. All right, now these are unlawful profits. If they have been stolen, seized and all that, then okay, fine, we can take them back and redistribute. And that can be done through the courts, through class action lawsuits and whatever. That's fine. But socialists want to seize lawfully gained profits. They want to seize everything. We can't make any mistake about that. And that's why I push back against it so hard, because, yeah, saying they want to seize the means of production is because they want to seize profits, but they would go much further if they could. That type of thinking, that socialistic thinking, they'll seize anything productive to feed the unproductive. Why would they do that? Because it goes back to survival of the incompetent. Once you can feed off of the productive, you don't need to be productive. Once you're feeding off of those who are productive, you don't need to be productive. If you solidify your position that you can continuously feed off the productive, just like feeding off a farm animal, like a dairy cow, once you're in the position where you have developed dairy cows, you know how to raise them and milk them, you don't need to produce food in another way. You don't need to be competent in producing food in another way. That animal is producing the food for you. Same thing with socialism. I'll push hard against socialism, and I'll push hard against insanity, and I think they go together. Insanity and socialism go together. They're not the same thing. And there are socialistic types of structures that I'm not opposed to. And there are certain things about insanity that are not bad. You know, there's brain damage, and there's confusion in the brain, and there's irrationality due to ignorance and that sort of thing. Those things, they are excusable. But the unexcusable insanity, the unexcusable, how should I say, parasitic doctrines of socialism, those I'm pushing back against. And I'm going to explain. A lot of people are insane because they just can't help it, right? But we need to recognize whether it's something that we can tolerate or something we can't tolerate. And it gets very complicated because some people are insane and abusive. Those two together, insane and abusive. Some are insane and dependent. They're not abusive. But some people are insane and abusive. That's where we need to be careful. And some socialistic things are abusive as well. And that's where we need to be careful in what we accept. In general, I'll be talking about abusive insane people in abusive socialistic structures. My talks will be centered around fighting against abuse. That's why I go into human rights. If we name the human rights, we can automatically see the abuses that are in conflict with human rights. Without naming the human rights, we don't see the abuses. We have to name the human rights, and then we can see the abuses. We have to know what success is, and then we can see failure in the attempt to cause failure very clearly. Once we know how to achieve success, we can spot what causes failure, intentional causes of failure. So I'm pushing back against mentalities that cause failure and mentalities that are abusive, and structures that cause failure and structures that are abusive. And the primary avenue of all this abuse is authoritarianism. There is authoritarianism within the family structure with parents and children, and that environment can become very abusive. We need to be able to guide and train parents into not we need to train parents to not be abusive in that environment. It has to be an authoritarian environment. But once we get into society as adults, that environment can no longer be authoritarian because we cannot trust government. It's been proven that we cannot trust government. It has to be an employee of society. It cannot be the parent of society. We must be the adults who have employed the government and not be children of the government. All right, that's it. I went over an hour. I'm surprised. Kind of. All right, that's it for this week. I'll see you next week.